Got a great film tone to play, next.
Hello?
Have you ever snubbed a lady?
We had a technical problem.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on there.
Can I swear? Shit!
Welcome to Crunch and Roll, tales from the dysfunctional world of radio, told by the people who have been there, done that, and can name every nightclub in at least 5 regional towns. I'm John Fox, and in a former life, I spent 2 decades presenting breakfast shows on BRMB, Signal, Viking FM, 210 FM, and BBC Radio WM. And still got the bags under my eyes to prove it. Now, this podcast is all about stories. So we were thinking, who do we know who often entertains us with tall tales and big laughs whenever there's some kind of radio reunion or gathering? The answer is a man who's been a presenter, a producer, an author, a TV guy, head of music, and is currently the question setter for the biggest game on UK radio. His name is Lee Thompson, or Tomo to his mates, and I've known Lee for over 2 decades, and he is the consummate raconteur. But in this chat, I still heard loads of tales that I'd never heard before. Like how he was party to hearing an incredible demo from a 16-year-old future radio star, how he chatted to the most famous band of the 90s on more than one occasion, and the insane act that got him sacked from a radio station in Wales that I can't pronounce the name of. Now, before we start, just our regular reminder that if you do enjoy the podcast and you are a regular listener, then we're always grateful for any support that you can give us on Ko-fi. Just go to ko-fi.com/crunchandroll.
Oh, yeah.
Lee, how are you?
Brilliant. And yourself?
I'm really good. It's we've kept it no secret that we do know each other, and
we do. We've known each other since Viking. Yeah, we're part of the Viking mafia from back in the late 90s, early 90s.
You're certainly one of the godfathers. I think I'm probably one of the henchmen when it comes to Viking. I think I'm right on the periphery of being part of that mafia.
Am I Don Corleone then? Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
yeah, something like that.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So, thank you so much for coming on Crunch and Roll. I know we've talked about it for some time, and
I'm very nervous.
Why though? Everyone says they get nervous.
It's. I tell you what it is. I've been spending today thinking about all of this because we're recording it in the evening, and it's one of those things. It's kind of like I've just gone back and I've just sort of thought, oh my God, it's like all of these stories and all of these people and all these brilliant kind of colleagues that I've had over the years that, you know, are infinitely better in certain things than I am, yet somehow I've managed to kind of survive it all, where so many have kind of fallen by the wayside, you know. So I feel lucky, but I feel quite nervous sort of talking about it as well, which is as you say, a lot of people seem to say that on this podcast. It's I'm not a podcast person either. I don't really listen to podcasts.
All right, let's go right back to the start. So you're from up there somewhere, up north.
I am from a place on the south side of the Tyne. Sort of obviously, anybody that's kind of from up in the northeast, sort of, you know, your heart's with Newcastle. But I'm actually from a place that's about 6 or 7 miles outside Newcastle on the Gateshead side. It's a place called Wickham.
So let's get to your passion of radio, because you know we spent some time together working together. I don't actually know where your passion came from.
It came, I would say, 100%. From my Auntie Lynn. Now, my Auntie Lynn is only 13 years older than me. So when I was 4 years old, and my mum and dad would go off and say, right, we're having a night out, Auntie Lynn would babysit. And she's my mum's youngest sister. And she, on a Saturday, would have me round at my grandma's house, her mum's house, in Bensham, which is another part of Gateshead, and they had one of these massive radiograms, is what they were called. So if you think of a wardrobe on its side, right, that sort of size with a record player built into it, but big, boxy kind of sound. And if you think about all of those great records from the late 60s, early 70s, Motown particularly, things with a bit of a Northern Soul sort of angle to it. Frida Payne, Band of Gold is a prime example. I just remember her playing that over and over again. So she used to do stuff in her hairdressers on a Saturday afternoon for a bit of pocket money when she was like 16, 17 or whatever. And her and her friend Maureen would then come round and babysit for me on a Saturday night with this radiogram, and I just stack it. Because remember, you used to have a spindle in the middle of a record deck, and you could stack it like 16, 17 7-inch vinyl singles high with an interchange dropping on the needle coming onto the record. I trashed all of Lynn's records, and she's never forgiven me for that. Every time I see her, she's like, "You ruined my record collection," which I kind of did at the time. But that was my first obsession. That was me getting into really kind of music and just understanding the power of music and the love of those brilliant songs that, for me, I mean, still sound fantastic today. Put Frida Payne's Band of Gold on when you've listened to this, and think of me as a 4-year-old hearing that for the first time and just thinking, this is the bollocks, this is great, So that's what got me into it.
Now, for people that don't know you, Lee, and as we go through your career, of course, you became a head of music at various places, and your passion and your knowledge of music is second to none. It's just incredible, and it's very infectious as well, because when you spend time with you go, yeah, I love music as well. Yeah. And then occasionally we'll have a disagreement, or you'll disagree with somebody else about a certain song, but it's all for the love of music. And I always wondered with you, was it radio that came first, or was it music?
I think it was music first, and then it was discovering radio. And I think the radio thing came when I was I'd say probably about 7 or 8 years old. And my dad got me, I think from one of his friends, he'd done a job somewhere and had a bit of money, and got a radio cassette, not a radio cassette player, just a cassette player actually. And one of his friends had put a tape in of all the big hits of 1972. So I'm 6 years old at this point, right? And it's basic. So I'm hearing all of these songs for the first time. So I'm not really au fait with what's getting played on the radio at that stage, because I'm not really hearing it, and we don't really have the radio playing in the house, weirdly. But like I say, Lynn's passion for music and buying those singles on a Saturday afternoon and playing them on a Saturday night with Maureen and me, and then kind of like having this cassette and hearing these songs, that was the start of it. Then I remember quite clearly on my 9th birthday getting a record player and a album that I still treasure to this day, a Ronco 20-track compilation called You Can Make Me Dance, Sing or Anything, which is basically the title of the first track on the album, which is Rod Stewart and the Faces, a hit from sort of late 74, 75. And basically that album, I just played that to death. And that was fantastic. Also around that time was when you would get the cheap supermarket knockoff compilation albums that were, some of them were like called Top of the Pops, but there was also Pickwick had a version of their own, MFP, Music for Pleasure, had a version of their own, all that kind of thing as well. So I would hear these knockoff versions of the hits that I thought were the original versions until a few years later, when you kind of go, oh, so the reason I could buy that in a supermarket for 99 pence on a Friday night is because it was a cheap knockoff version that they did when the songs were in the charts. So that was kind of sort of my first taste, collecting those and then getting that album. And then the big thing was on my 11th Christmas, 1977, Christmas 77. My dad knew I was really into all of this kind of sort of music and stuff. And he'd been a big Radio Luxembourg fan when he was a kid and was into kind of sort of rock and roll. And he could see a little bit of that sort of spark of that passion sort of coming through in me. And he bought, it must have cost him a fortune at the time, a Panasonic, National Panasonic as they were branded at the time, silver radio cassette player. So I could now tape things off the radio. And I had it in my bedroom, and I just became obsessed with radio at that point. Absolutely obsessed. And it had a aerial, extendable area. And because of where we lived, we'd moved it at this point to a place called Sunnyside, which is just up the road from Wickham. It's like the next village up, and it's higher on a hill. So I was able to pick up Radio Tees. So not Metro, which was our local station, which was down in Swarwell, literally just down the bank from where we lived. I was listening to Radio Tees instead, and that just seemed so much more glamorous and so much more attractive than Metro, because they were playing like really cool chart hits and stuff that was on the fringes of the charts. So that was the start of it for me. Even though I'd grown up kind of listening to Noel Edmonds on Radio 1 with his breakfast show, which if you go back and listen to clips of now, it's really kind of moribund, really is the best way to describe it. But at the time, it sounded really exciting. Yeah. But now Radio Tees was like, wow, this is amazing. This is fantastic. So that was what really kind of got me into radio. And hearing Mark Page was the guy who was doing breakfast at the time. I think it was only like 19 or whatever. And he was my first kind of like, I like what he's doing here. I could kind of maybe do this one day as well. So that was my that was my childhood, really. That was my getting into listening to radio and understanding the mechanics and the way that songs were played and how playlists were put together and all that kind of thing as well. That was the time that became apparent to me, really.
I hope you don't mind. This is very unique for Crunch and Roll, but because of your skills, I'm going to occasionally throw in an artist and a song. You've got to tell me maybe what chart position it got or what year it was released. Oh, God. Go on then. Daniel Bedingfield, I Can't Read You, got to number 6, when? Oh, well, Bedingfield's first hit was 2001 into 2002. That was going to get through this. Then he had a couple more hits. I Can't Read You, was that his second album? It was a great song.
I'm going to say, I don't know, so it's going to be 2003 probably. I don't really remember. Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
I love it. I love spending time with you because you're like a little puppet in the corner you can play with. You're like, Lee, when was this out? It's great.
Yeah. Is that the album that's got that terrible James Dean song on as well, is it? Is that the one?
Simon, who produces this pod, Simon and I have got a mutual love for Daniel Bedingfield. We think.
Have you?
Yeah, sorry. All right, let's talk about your first step into a studio. So you've talked about how you've got that passion now. You've got the love of music. In 1983, Radio Tyneside Hospital Radio.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of guests that we've had on Crunch and Roll. It's definitely 50-50. Some have had a great experience, some have had horrific experiences. What was yours?
Oh, I was a bolshy little shit, really, to be honest with you. I think they hated me pretty much, because it was kind of like I knew best and, all that kind of thing. But you do when you're like 16, 17 years old. So it started off at hospital in Gateshead and then went over to the General in Newcastle. So they had studios in both, and I used to do request shows and stuff. I do remember hearing that. I don't know if someone was teasing me on this, but this is what I genuinely heard somebody tell me, that somebody had requested the Shirley Bassey song. So I went into the library and found Shirley Bassey doing all kinds of, kind of show tunes. But she was also doing a song that had been a big hit for, I think it was written by Noel Coward, actually, but it was a hit for Gary Shearston in the 70s called I Get a Kick Out of You. I get a kick out of you. Yeah. Imagine Shirley Bassey doing that. Brilliant, okay? I then hear, after I've read this request for this person that's in hospital, blah, 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 that they just had their leg amputated. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But anyway, that was part of my formative experience at Hospital Radio Tyneside. But yeah, I mean, prior to that, I'd been making shows in my bedroom. I mean, this is pure Stephanie Hurst territory there. Making shows when my mum and dad were out. I was kind of slightly embarrassed to be making radio shows, so waited till my mum and dad would go out kind of shopping on the Friday night. Oh, just popping out for an hour. I'm thinking, right, great, I've got C90 here, I've got 45 minutes, I can make a radio show. Thankfully I don't have any of those tapes anymore, but that was my kind of start into it. And then hearing about this thing called hospital radio and thinking, oh, maybe I could do something there. And I have no recollection of how I got an in there or who I went to see or how it all happened, but it happened. And I was there for, I think, about 18 months or something till it got to the point where they just went, I don't think that we should continue this relationship. It's like, oh, okay, thanks and bye. And that was it. Yeah. So that was kind of summer 85, I think that was.
Yeah, I mean, you're on that elite list who get binned off from a hospital radio voluntary service. That's pretty
I think it was mutual consent is what they describe it as, don't they? Yeah,
we've all been binned and had that.
We've all been there,
yeah. All right, so 1988, Radio Top Shop, which, we've had a lot of guests that have been on Radio Top Shop. Talk to me about how you got into that and your experiences.
Well, Radio Top Shop came about. I'd been a nightclub DJ in Newcastle. I was 21, and there was a big club in Newcastle called Madison. Basically, I got in there when I was 21 and was there for about 8 or 9 months. And that was kind of me, again, learning kind of like how to put a playlist together and learning how to kind of do it on a night-by-night basis. I was getting paid 90 quid a week. I was doing, nearly 6 hours, 5 hours a night, 3 hours during the daytime, 90 quid a week. And that was 6 nights a week, believe it or not. Yeah, and that was in 1987. So after that, when that all kind of imploded, I'd worked in, they had branches all over the place. There's a Madison in Middlesbrough at the time. There's a Madison in Leeds. There was a Madison in Nottingham. I'd done some work in Nottingham, which was a real eye opener because it was just as house music was starting to come through. So there's us playing, pretty much what's in the chart, and all these kids coming up every night and going, "Got any house? Got any house?" And I'm like, kind of, what is this? All these kids are like asking for. And it was just at the point, there was a big record at the time, a real underground sound that you never hear anymore, called House Nation by the Housemaster Boys, I think it is, from 87. Look it up. It was a top 10 hit, but never got played on the radio. And it's a real kind of one of those sounds like something from outer space kind of records. But that's what, that was me starting to sort of wake up to the fact that, oh, okay, so, there's two sort of parallel worlds going on here. There's the world of kind of clubbing, and there's a world of radio, and the two things don't necessarily always mix. So that was quite an eye-opener. But then, Radio Top Shop came along. Cannot remember for the life of me how I got the gig. Cannot remember. I really can't, genuinely. I've no idea. But managed to work my way into the Metro Centre in Gateshead. So I'd been working at McDonald's when the Metro Centre opened in October 1986. And that was the first ever branch of McDonald's north of Leeds, believe it or not.
Was it?
Yeah, so there was no other McDonald's anywhere beyond Leeds. So this was quite a thing. So people would travel from like Scotland, down from Scotland, across from Cumbria, all over the northeast to come to this one branch of McDonald's. So I was working there and was aware that there was this kind of sort of thing that was happening at Top Shop where they'd have some sort of DJ or something going on. So I must have just spoke to somebody and said, what is this? I've got a bit of experience. I've been a nightclub DJ, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the guy who ran that was a fellow called Peter Knott, based over in Manchester, of which I'll tell you more in a moment. Anyway, I got the gig. That was incredible because what you had under the escalator in Top Shop in the Metro Centre on the ground floor, you had a fully functioning radio studio with cart machines, CD players, record decks, and a record library of sorts. A good, kind of decent size, kind of, not as big as the one that I had at home at this point, but decent size. So, really interesting. I was working there. The store was open from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. I worked there 6 days a week from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night as the only DJ in store. No. I would go in at 9 o'clock in the morning and record on a C90 cassette 45 minutes, which I would then play out on my lunch break, if you want to call it that, which I'd do at 1 o'clock. So between 1 and 1:45 was this thing I recorded at 9 o'clock. I'd then come back and do live till about 5 o'clock. I'd then play the previous day's thing that I'd recorded at 5 o'clock, and then work right through till 8 o'clock. And I did that 6 days a week and got paid about 120 quid or something.
How come it was just you then? How come they were?
I have absolutely no idea. But it was just me literally talking. I mean, the speakers were booming out across that sort of part of the Metro Centre. So you could hear it for kind of, I would say a good 100 yards before you actually got to Top Shop. When they're allowed to put speakers outside and back in those days. And that was great, and to be able to do all of that. But what was interesting was, kind of after about a year and a half, I guess, sort of early 1990, Peter Knott, who was the boss over in Manchester, said, how would you fancy coming over and working in our office in Manchester? And I said, to do what? He said, well, we don't just do Radio Top Shop. We've got these branches of Radio Top Shop all over the place, yes, but we do the in-store music for pretty much every high street fashion chain. I was like, okay. So you'd be in the studio. We got a studio in Manchester in our office in Flixton. And basically you would, on a Monday morning, you'd come in, you'd put playlists together. You'd then record this stuff as live, as a non-stop 45-minute, 60-minute playlist, transfer it onto DAT, and then we'd transfer that stuff from DATs onto cassettes and send these cassettes out to all the branches of things like Dulcis, all these big high street stores that were around at the time that don't exist anymore. And when I was living in Manchester, it was interesting because on a Saturday afternoon, I would walk down the main street in Manchester, Market Street, and literally pop into one shop. It's like, oh, there's my playlist that I did on Tuesday. Then walk in the next shop. There's the tape. But oh, they're still playing the one from last week. Why haven't they got the new tape in there? All that kind of thing. So doing all of that was absolutely fascinating. But again, a real learning curve because Peter and his company, Heaton Norton Company, had so many different clients. They had a bar somewhere in Manchester, for instance, that wanted a tape playing on their tannoy that was a combination of current hit singles and hits from the war era. Because it was themed around the Blitz, yeah.
Right, okay.
So I used to call this colloquially used to call his playlist "Hits from the Blitz," and it was kind of And they wanted a mix of hits from the war era, stuff that was in the charts, and kids' TV themes. It was like a burger place or a restaurant of some sort or whatever it was. Obviously, it doesn't exist anymore, I'm sure. But yeah, that was fascinating putting all that together. So I did that for one place. Dulcis wanted Baroque classical music, so I had to gen up on Baroque classical music and do a new playlist for them every 6 weeks. Just fascinating times, absolutely fascinating. But the interesting thing about that was, of course, Peter, as the boss, would get lots of demo tapes from people. People aspiring to work at other branches of Radio Top Shop, wherever they happen to be. And the interesting thing about that was, on a Tuesday night, Peter and I would have a catch up and we'd go for a meal or driving in his car. So there's one Tuesday night in the summer of 1990 when he says to me, "See, I've got a tape in. I need you to hear this tape." I'm like, okay. Right, puts it in the cassette player in the car. Bruno Brooks' voice comes on. "Hi, I'm Bruno Brooks. I want to introduce you to a young man who I think is going to go really far in this business. He's only 16 years old, but listen out for this name. It's Chris Moyles." And what I then heard was a 7-minute demo from this 16-year-old Chris Moyles that is still to this day the best demo tape I've ever heard from anybody. It was phenomenal. So to have that testimonial on the front from Bruno Brooks, right? I don't know if Chris Moyles knows this, but yeah, so me and Peter in the car, and Peter says to me, "What do you think?" And I went, "It's brilliant. You should get him a job immediately." And he said, "I can't." He said, "I can't. I've got this rule." I said, "I can't let anybody work in Top Shop, in Radio Top Shop, unless they're over 21, just for kind of legal reasons and stuff." He said, "But this kid's 16 and it's like blah, 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 blah." Anyway, as I understand it, I think Chris did some shifts on a Saturday with somebody else at Radio Top Shop when he was still in his teens. But yeah, that was the start of Chris Moyles' career. I actually heard Chris Moyles' demo tape that he sent to Radio Top Shop, and Peter, the boss, coming to me and saying, "What do you think?" And me going, "This is brilliant." So Chris, if you're listening, it's all down to me, mate.
Where's your cut?
It was genius. I hope he's still got that tape because it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Is it true that you did a couple of weekend shifts at Clyde as well? Because Clyde was a beast of a station, wasn't it?
I did. This is so weird. I was at Radio Top Shop in the Metro Centre, and there's a guy at Radio Top Shop in Glasgow called Nick Parr, who's the DJ there, and he'd just been called in by the guy who was running Clyde at the time, called Graham Morland. Because it was at that point in late 89. Do you remember when the stations were having to split? So you had FM and AM, and the Radio Authority or IBA, whoever it was at the time, said you can't have the same output going out on FM and AM. You have to split if you want to kind of carry on keeping your license. So you've got to do. So Clyde decided, right, we're going to do oldies on AM, on medium wave as it was, and on VHF FM we're going to do hot rocking chart stuff and contemporary hot CHR. So they were looking for jocks because, the guys that were on Clyde at that point in time were just naturally gravitated towards AM. So they were looking for young kids. And me as someone in their early 20s, and Nick, who was the jock up at Radio Top Show in Glasgow in his early 20s, was like, we got called in. It's like, do you want to do a shift? It's like, yeah. What, on Radio Clyde in Glasgow? Yeah. So why don't you come up on Friday afternoon and you can do the show on Sunday morning? Yeah, like sort of early breakfast, kind of 7 till 10 a.m. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is a bit bonkers. So I went up to Clyde and I sat in the record library on the Friday afternoon. I put my show together, handwritten what I was going to sort of play, songs, all that kind of thing. Do what you had to fill out all the PRS details, by hand in those days. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. Still got the tapes, John. Oh my God.
Are they bad?
Fucking hell, they're horrendous. I mean, I thought I was actually quite good at the time, but no, just horrible. And you know what made it worse? My radio hero at that point, who I'd listened to when I was a kid, Mark Page, was the guy that was on immediately after me at 10. I did 2 shows, never got asked back. Not surprising, really. Not surprising. That was interesting just to see, how a proper commercial radio station worked. I'd kind of seen it when I did work experience at Metro, my local station in 83. When I was at school, the English teacher said to me, where do you want to do work experience? I said, I'd love to go at Metro. And he fixed it up for me. And I'm forever grateful to that teacher, Chris Brunton's was his name, for getting me a week working at Metro and being there the week that Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart was the most requested song on the station. And it was number 2 on the chart, and Metro weren't playing it because, in the words of Steve Martin, who was the head of music at the time, it's too spiky.
Really?
Yes. That's how mellow Metro was at that point. Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart was too spiky. But I got to know Giles, and Giles is somebody who you must get on Crunch and Roll. I know other people have talked about that. If you can track him down and get him, I mean, his stories are just incredible, and what a guy. I mean, Giles is interesting because he's the guy who, not a lot of people know this, he broke so many hits in 1986, 1987 from Europe. On Metro in 86, we're going through this kind of transition period, trying to get people like me in my late teens, early 20s to listen to the station, because it was pretty much a mellow station that my mum would listen to because they played Johnny Mathis during the day, that sort of thing. Anyway, Giles had this sort of transformative idea in sort of 86 and kind of went, well, you know what? Why don't we start playing more contemporary hits? And I've got a friend who's at a radio station I can't remember if it was in Belgium or Holland or Austria or whatever it was, that would send him on carts the big Euro hits for Giles to play out on his show on the Thursday afternoon. So he did this hour-long slot at like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon every week called the Euro Chart. And there was one song that he started playing that couldn't get any traction anywhere. The label here in the UK just sort of said, well, they're a rock band from Sweden. Who the hell's going to play this? Giles started playing it, and it became the most requested song in the Northeast. And apparently, when it was finally released as a single, it was the Northeast that was driving the national sales and put it into the chart. And it was the final countdown by Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, Giles is the guy that actually made that song a hit, which is quite astonishing. Sony didn't want anything to do with that in this country. So, you must get Giles on. He's got a million great stories like that. Joey Tempest, the lead singer, apparently sang at his wedding or his big birthday party as a thank you, apparently. So, yeah.
It was a technical problem. You heard something on air you shouldn't have done.
Oh, yeah.
Lee, what year did Curiosity Kill the Cat Misfit get to number 7?
Oh, that's easy. That's 1987. That's when I was at Madison DJing. Yeah, we used to play that a lot. I think it got played about 4 or 5 times a night. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to the next. So in 1990, is it Weir FM?
Weir FM.
Weir FM? I mean,
Weir FM.
I'm so sorry, Lee. I've never heard of it.
Weir FM. Don't worry. It doesn't exist. It only existed for 5 years. Fascinating station. I was doing stuff in Manchester, like I say, with Peter over at Heat and Not for Top Shop. I'd gone and done some bits and pieces back at Glasgow because I wasn't really enjoying Manchester. And then somebody said to me one day, there's this new radio station that's going to open in Sunderland. And it's going to be part of the Forster building, which was part of Sunderland Polytechnic at the time. And what they're going to do, they're going to use this radio station as a radio station to encourage students to get into radio and understand, kind of how radio works and sound course, basically. So they were going to set up this radio station. Anyway, there was a guy I knew at the time called Glenn. And Glenn and I walked into Weir FM about 6 weeks before it launched. And it was just organised. Well, not even organised, disorganised chaos. People running round like headless chickens. Lots of volunteers, lots of people that had never done radio before. Lots of people just terrified that they'd actually been given a licence to broadcast. And what are we going to do when this station goes on the air? I stood for about 30 seconds with Glenn and just watched this room full of people, like seemingly clueless. And I just said to Glenn, I said, you know what? I'm going to be doing the breakfast show on this station in 6 months. And he looked at me and he went, I think you're probably right. And I did end up doing the breakfast show on there after about 8 weeks, I think it was. 8 weeks of being on air. So to explain what Weir FM was, it was the first of its kind community stations in the UK. So the Radio Authority had kind of decided that within an area like Metros, there would be somewhere like Sunderland that was underserved in their opinion. So a community station could kind of sort of fill that void. It was run by this incredible maverick from Australia called Pietro O'Shaughnessy, who basically took everything you could think of how a pirate radio station would work and tried to mould that into a radio station that would be acceptable for the whole community. So you would have a book program on a Tuesday, you'd have a finance program on a Wednesday, you'd have, all of these kind of daft little things going on. They did some research before the station went on air and asked people what is the most underserved music genre that you'd like to hear on the radio. And all the research came back as country music. So what do? Tell you what you do. You do an exclusive all country breakfast show from 5:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock in the morning. And you get a guy called Mike Shaft to present it. Now, if anybody knows Mike Shaft, legend in Manchester, brilliant soul DJ, presenting a all breakfast country music show on a radio station in Sunderland. It didn't work.
No.
Needless to say that after 6 weeks, and bear in mind, I was in there doing an indie show on a Friday night. They came to me and said, would you like to do breakfast and maybe make it a bit more mainstream than what we've been doing? So that was me starting on that. It was unbelievable. Incredible time, because they eventually won Sony Gold Station of the Year in 1992. Yeah, I mean it was incredible because it was such a unique experiment. I mean, like I say, started on breakfast, didn't really enjoy it. They started kind of asking me to do all these things that I wasn't particularly happy about doing. I felt that I kind of was more in control than they were. They kind of didn't like that. It was a difficult kind of time in many ways. But I mean, the stuff that Weir FM was doing, go on to SoundCloud, go on to Mixcloud, just put in Weir FM, Boogie Bass and Soulfish, which is a strand that they'd have every night, a dance music strand that sounded like it was beamed in from outer space or a pirate radio station. So they had local kind of club DJs doing 4-hour shows with shout outs, and the phone lines, I mean, were literally red hot. You could not imagine just how busy the phone lines were for people wanting shout outs. We heard stories, and I still see stuff online about people, talking about how they lived in Hexham up in Northumberland, but they were glad they were high on a hill because they could pick up Weir FM if they put their aerial up. And it felt like you were just hearing this mad radio station that seemingly nobody had any control over. We're talking about 34 years ago here. They had a show called Gay to Gay, right? Okay. Which were two guys Megasal was one of the presenters on a Friday night, and they would play 4 hours of non-stop high energy music, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. Some of that stuff still exists, like I say, online. You find it on YouTube, you find it on Mixcloud, SoundCloud. Go and dive in, because it's incredible. But I was so lucky when I was there, because I moved from breakfast and said, well, I think I'd probably rather do the drive show, and I'd rather give it more of a kind of indie spin, because those, the students are they're the bulk of the people that are kind of listening to this station, and sort of consuming it, even though it's for the wider community. So I tried to make a blend of kind of accessible and sort of student friendly, sort of mainstream indie, if that's what you like, what I call it. And funnily enough, you like this, I've got my 1991 desk diary here from Weir FM that I just found earlier on. And it's got all my little notes in. I used to put bits and pieces. Have a look at this, right? You'll love this. This is September the 6th, 1991 telephone interview. What does that say, John?
No.
What's it say?
Nirvana.
What's it say?
Calling us Friday at 12 noon. You've got 15 minutes with them. No. No way.
Nirvana calling us Friday, 12 noon, 15 minutes, September the 6th. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Jesus wept.
Yeah, we got quite a reputation, and it was great, because I was lucky enough to be able to go down to London, see people at record companies, tell them, just kind of like be quite an evangelical about Weir FM, and how we were able to kind of, introduce a lot of this music to an audience that might not else have heard it anywhere else in the Northeast. I had people like PJ Harvey come in and did a session for us, Gary Newman was playing Newcastle City Hall one night, and he came in for an hour-and-a-half interview talking about his entire career. And his mum, Beryl, who ran his fan club and also was kind of his manager, she said to me, I'm going to leave you to it. Can you tell me where the nearest branch of Boots is, please? And I said, yeah, there's one just in Sunderland Town Centre. Just kind of go through the alleyway there and blah, blah, blah. Why, what's up? She said, I just need to get some foot cream for Gary. He's having a bit of a problem with his feet at the minute. So, yeah, it was great times. I mean, really, really great times. What else have I got in this diary? What's that one? Oh, yeah. So when Nirvana played Newcastle Mayfair in December, so about 10 weeks later or whatever it was, Nevermind had just blown up at this point, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was just charting. And I got to interview, they said, do you want to do an interview face to face? So there's me with my Ewer, as they were back in the day, interviewing, going for a Nirvana interview. But beforehand, I went to Newcastle City Hall, because there was a gig on that night as well with The Farm were playing. Do you remember The Farm, Groovy Train, and All Together Now? They had a support band called Natural Life. And Natural Life had a guy who was their drummer, percussionist, called Shovel. Now, if you know anything about Shovel, Shovel's the guy who then became the drummer and percussionist in M People. And Shovel and I went to Newcastle Mayfair after Natural Life had finished their gig to watch Nirvana. So I remember standing with Shovel, watching Nirvana in Newcastle Mayfair. Literally, Dave Grohl absolutely smashed his drum kit up afterwards. And Shovel just turns to me and said, you're interviewing these guys in a minute, aren't you? I went, yes, I am. He went, good luck, mate. It was, I interviewed Dave Grohl, actually, because Kurt was sat directly behind me being interviewed by two kids from a local fanzine. And Dave nudged him, tapped him on the shoulder and said, Kurt, guy here, Lee, local radio station. Well, I talked to him, and Kurt goes, no, man, I only talk to fanzines now.
Wow.
Yeah, there we go. So, Weir FM, an amazing place. I mean, it only existed 5 years. I was there for about 18 months of it. Incredible. But yeah, go and seek some of it out on SoundCloud and Mixcloud, because it's 34 years ago, and it sounds like it could have been yesterday. Amazing.
Let's talk about XFM then, Lee.
Yeah.
In 92. I mean, this is your first we should have explained that you now live in London, but this is your first experience of London, isn't it?
No, I don't live in London. That's the thing. I'm still living in the northeast. I'm actually I'm sleeping on people's sofas, and in fact,
really?
I'm not even sleeping on people's sofas. I'm actually when XFM comes up, and I think it all came about because Music Week had written a very nice little piece, kind of towards the end of '91, early '92. Talking about people at local radio stations around the UK that were kind of quite championing indie music, if you like.
Right.
And my name was mentioned there, which was really fortunate. And I think it must have somebody at or setting up XFM must have seen it and gone, "Who's this guy?" I have again no recollection of how I, did they talk to me on the phone? Did I go and see them in person? I've got no recollection. Was I down in London?
Lee, for somebody who's got such an incredible memory with music, you can't remember how you've gone from station to station. Not once.
Honestly, the next one I can, but this one I can't. But anyway, it's kind of, it is interesting that is the case. I just can't remember how that whole gig kind of came about. But it did, and they said, "Do you want to do breakfast?" I'm like, breakfast on a London radio station. At that point, what was happening was XFM were just doing RSLs, restricted service licenses. So the radio authority would give them 30 days to kind of sort of prove themselves, show us that there is a viable going concern here, and you are actually serving some sort of need that isn't currently served by another radio station. Which they did very, very successfully, although it took them another 5 years before they actually got a full license. But I was there doing breakfast with Gary Crowley on After Me. Paul Anderson was a guy doing the mid-afternoons, and then there was Steve Lamack had never done radio before. He was a journalist at the NME. Steve came and did drive time. We had a guy called John Kennedy doing evenings. John Kennedy still does Radio X and was XFM. So John's been there for 30 odd years now. That was quite an eye-opener. I literally was sleeping on friends' couches, and sometimes when I couldn't even get a friend's couch to sleep on, I would sleep in the office at XFM, which had a nice black leather sofa in, and was the offices of the Cure's management company, 97 Charlotte Street. And Chris Parry, who managed the Cure, was one of the guys who kind of helped set up XFM with a guy called Sammy Jacob. And I would lie on the sofa with a towel over me at night, waiting for my alarm to go off. In the background, there would be a fax machine whirring all night, with faxes coming in from America, from the management company over there to tell the Cure what their chart position was in America. Just amazing. But the thing about XFM at that point was we were kind of quite instrumental in breaking the Cure's new album, which was around at that particular point. And it's the first time the Cure had ever had a #1 album. It's the album that's got Friday I'm in Love on. Which obviously still gets played to this day. So that was amazing. So I did an RSL with them in the spring of '92, and then did another one in the autumn of '92.
Let's move on to the next gig then. So Radio 5.
Yes.
It says here, and we've done a bit of research, you do know how you got this gig.
I do. Basically, Gary Crowley was asked by the bosses of a show that was on Radio 5 at the time. It was before it became 5 Live. So they used to have youth magazine programs and all kinds of stuff on there. Thursday night, there's a show called Vibe! Very 1992. That basically, Gary Crowley was asked to go and do an interview. Liz Kershaw was the co-host. Mark Lamar was the co-host as well. Wow. And they needed somebody from XFM to come along, talk about XFM on a national level, and why it was causing such ripples in London, and people talking about it as something that maybe this is the future of radio, blah 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 blah. Gary couldn't do it. Gary was doing a corporate gig for a record company that night, so they said, "Do you want to do it?" And I went, "Yeah, whatever. Okay, I'll go along." The first time I'd ever stepped foot into Broadcasting House in London, even though it was like literally about 3-4 minutes walk from Charlotte Street, and went in, met the producers, met the production team, all that kind of thing, and went in live on the Thursday night, sat next to Mark Lamar, sat opposite Liz, doing this interview talking about XFM. Anyway, what's really interesting, me just doing that interview and getting on well with the producer and stuff, it became apparent that Mark Lamar was about to leave. he'd just been given a gig on The Big Breakfast, believe it or not. So they said, we need somebody to be Liz's new sidekick. Would you be interested?
Wow.
And I was like, yeah. The only thing is, I'm going off to America for a month-long holiday, stay with my friend in Baltimore in a few weeks' time. And he went, that's fine. When you get back, come in and do the sidekick thing. And I was like, okay. So I remember I did a telephone piece on the day that President Clinton was elected, and they asked me to do a piece from a youth perspective as to kind of, what were the youth of America thinking now that President Clinton had been elected, blah 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 blah, after Reagan. Was it Reagan? No, it was Bush, wasn't it? I think before him, yeah. So that was my in. That was my in into the BBC, and I did some ridiculous things. They had me doing some. I got to interview Duran Duran, got to the Top of the Pops and meet Jesus Jones, got to go to Germany and do an interview with the Levelers, got to go to the Brits nominations and piss off all of the bosses at the Brits by asking why the Shaman weren't nominated, which was a bit of a contentious issue that year apparently. It was fun times, really really fun times.
Cunty.
We apologise, sir.
We just play records till 8, 9, when do we finish?
I'm not drunk. I've had a couple of drinks. I'm not drunk.
All right, let's move on to the next station then, because we've got so much to cram in. This one took me by surprise. I didn't know. Radio Maldwyn.
Yeah, the Magic 756.
What? Can you remember the move to Radio Maldwyn?
I can. It came literally John Barnes, who was the news guy at Rock FM in Preston. I hadn't gone for an interview. I knew John. John was at Weir FM with me. That's right. John was a newsreader at Weir FM. That was it. And he had now got his hands on this little local station that was about to be set up, first radio station ever in mid Wales. And he, again, it was kind of based a lot on the principles of Weir FM and, kind of the community thing and doing shows for everybody and volunteers, but some paid presenters, including myself. And John was like, I really used to like what you did on Breakfast when you did that for that short stint in Weir FM. Why don't you come and do Breakfast in Radio Maldwyn in mid Wales? Never been to mid Wales before. I'd never been kind of really to the Midlands, to be honest with you. I met John in Wolverhampton. We drove over, Shrewsbury, through into Shropshire, through into mid Wales, and I'm like, there's nobody here. There's more sheep than people. So anyway, I told the people at Radio 5 and the people I was working with there, I said, well, I've been offered this full-time breakfast gig in mid Wales, and it's like, well, of course you're probably going to take it. I went, yeah, why not? So that's what I did. And Radio Maldwyn, the Magic 756 on medium wave, around about the time that Atlantic 252 was dominant in that kind of area. And, just doing things on a local level. And this kid from Newcastle being an idiot every morning on breakfast, it made me realise, I think in retrospect, that I'm a much better music presenter than a personality presenter. And I think you have talked in the past about this on Crunch and Roll, about that, that whole thing where you're, I think I had a mild nervous breakdown, genuinely. My mental health was struggling at that point. I got shingles, I was really ill for a while, worked through it. All of that kind of stuff was going on at the time. Because if anybody who's got breakfast show experience will tell you this, you don't switch off. You're thinking about that show all the time. You're thinking about features. You're thinking about ideas. You're thinking about something that you've seen somebody do that day on the street. You're thinking about something you've seen on TV. You're just thinking. You're reading about stuff all the time, and it's dangerous. It's really, really dangerous unless you kind of have got some good kind of work-life balance. And I didn't at that time, really. I just threw myself into it completely. I was head of music. So I was in the station, kind of 10 hours a day or whatever it was, and doing breakfast. And, it was a big fish in a very, very big fish in a very small pond. Loved Newtown, which is where the place was, where it was based. Again, managed to get some great people in for interviews, some people that you wouldn't expect, from the kind of indie world and stuff. I remember Frank Black from the Pixies coming in. like to mid Wales to do an interview. It's just crazy things like that. So I kept my kind of indie sort of credentials, if you like, but was trying to do the whole mainstream stuff. Got fired though for in retrospect a pretty stupid incident where the boss was away and I opened his mail, and one of the things in his mail was a demo tape from this kid and CV. And it was one of those breakfast shows where it's like, oh, I'm trying to be wacky and doing stunts on the air and all that kind of shit, And so basically, really not me at all. But basically this CV came through and I looked at it, and this kid, can't remember his name, thankfully, sent the tape, which was okay. But on it, he said that he was head of music at Weir FM in this particular date range. And I knew he was lying because I'd been head of music at Weir FM at that particular date range. Yeah. So I thought, why has he put this on? So I rang him up live on air. No. As the program controller from the radio station.
Oh, God.
Asking him, blah, blah, and then exposing his lie. God. I don't ever. I mean, I'm sure. I don't know. The tape probably exists somewhere. I don't ever want to hear it. But yeah, I mean, that was very foolhardy thing to do. Lesson learned. Them, no option but to fire me, basically. So I sat at home in Kerry, in mid Wales, in the bungalow that I was renting, licking my wounds for 6 weeks with absolutely no job prospects, skint, not eating properly. No girlfriend in my life or anything at that point. I mean, just like really kind of low, very, very low. Reading the local papers, the letters columns, and people writing in going, the magic 756 is now the tragic 756 now that Lee Thompson's left. Things like that. It was just hilarious. But yes, interestingly, not a rival station, but the station just across the way in Shropshire, Sunshine 855, were looking for a new presenter, and they got in touch and said, we know you've been fired from breakfast to Maldwyn, but do you want to come over here and do breakfast? I went, yeah, okay. So that's how I got the gig at Sunshine 855, and that was quite an interesting experience. Again, did breakfast for however long it was, then moved to mid-mornings for however long it was, sort of 6 months or whatever, but met this tenacious little teenage kid who was into his dance music, and I thought, there's something there. But he was doing I think he was doing an afternoon show at the time called Jason Griffiths. Name ring a bell?
JK, yeah.
JK, yeah. Jason Griffiths from God, where's he from again?
He's from Herefordshire, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the place. It's got a wacky little name, but yeah, Jason. That was Jason was. Let me see, how old was I at the time? Jason must have been 17, I think, maybe at the time. Something like that, yeah. 17, 18 maybe. And we both Jason and I left at around about the same time, actually. He got a gig at Galaxy in Bristol, and was doing, I think, evenings on Galaxy in Bristol. And I was up back in the northeast, licking my wounds, going, what am I going to do next? And then Viking happened.
Oh, yeah.
My favourite subject. Now that seems like a good place to end the first part of my chat with Lee. Here's a taster of part 2.
By the time I left Hull, I had 7,000 singles. It's the most listened to 15-20 minutes of British radio every weekday. We were looking for the big, cheesy punter hits, and fucking hell, we got a shitload of them. We really did.
Subscribe or follow us now on your podcast app of choice and get part 2 as soon as it drops.
Oh, yeah.